Thank you, Donald. Well, another day of great drama and huge activity, and we will talk tonight to one of President Trump's supporters, Governor Brown of Mississippi, about the sacking of John Bolton and what that means for the Trump administration. We will also talk tonight about this extraordinary ruling that government officials have to hand in their phones by 11 p.m. tonight so that they can be investigated. We might even talk a little bit about myself and some of the things said about me by the Conservative government today, but the story that absolutely dominates everything, of course, is the Court of Session in Edinburgh. Now, this time last week, there was a legal challenge to the High Court in London, who said the government had acted perfectly properly when they prorogued Parliament in order to call a Queen's speech. But the Scottish court has found very, very different. In fact, it basically said that the advice given to the Queen may prove to be unlawful, that it was motivated by the improper purpose of stymieing Parliament. I mean, these are very, very strong words that we've heard today from the Court of Session in Edinburgh. And this, of course, now will go to the Supreme Court, who will judge next Tuesday whether this was improper use. And already we've had MPs returning to Westminster, although the House of Commons, of course, is closed. And goodness knows what it would mean if next week the Supreme Court upheld the decision from Scotland. I don't know whether MPs would cancel all their party conferences or quite what would happen. Are you happy that the courts are getting involved in this? And I have to say, I really worry. I worry that the courts are part of the pro-Remain establishment. I worry, in the absence of a written constitution, by what measure do they judge any of these things? I'm concerned, but you tell me. Maybe you think, no, it's a good thing, because Parliament can't sort this out, so let's get the judges involved. If that's how you feel, call 0345 6060 973. If you, like me, think there's a great danger of them being political and there isn't really anything to measure their judgments by, text to 84850 and tell me, I wonder how you feel about these phones from officials being handed in by 11 o'clock. I mean, would anybody ever want to work for government again? Please tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course our growing number of viewers on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. You can comment too. I'm going to ask Ray in Canvey Island, who's a new caller. Ray, how do you feel about the judges getting involved in the Brexit process?
Well, it's only going to go one way or the other, really, mate. I mean, the MPs can't really seem to decide amongst themselves what the public have put to them. Mm-hmm. So I think personally, anyone's too scared to touch this, MPs, judges, apart from Boris. Boris has had the, as I'd call it, the balls to actually put forward what Theresa May hasn't been able to do, is to say how it is. I think personally the MPs and the judges are treading on thin ice. I mean, what are they asking for? Riots to happen? It's been 3 years nearly to go on.
Because we did have, Ray, you might remember a previous court judgment, and there was a front page headline in the Daily Mail which had the judges as enemies of the people. I mean, is that how you see the judges or not?
The judges will do what they think's right, and if the majority of the people in the Houses of Parliament are voting against it, they're going to go with the majority. Personally, I don't think the judges shouldn't be getting involved. Do you know who should be involved? The public, like it was put to the public. Cameron put it to the public full well and know that he was a disbeliever of leaving the Brexit. He knew that the public made the decision, so he had to step down.
So Ray, would you like another referendum, or would you like a general...
100%.
You would?
General election.
General election.
To the public to make the vote again. And then what we say is what's done. Exactly what's been said before. Why put it to the public to vote, to leave or not to leave? And then we didn't vote to leave with a deal, did we? On our poll cards, we didn't. We straight out, leave or stay.
Ray, I agree with you, but there are many MPs in Westminster who don't. I think they're twisting it, but hey, Ray, thank you. Marion Holloway says, I thought the Queen was in charge of our country, not judges and Parliament. Judges should obey the Queen. Well, the judges are questioning, the Scottish judges are questioning whether the Queen was given the correct advice. That is the nub, I think, of this judgment today, whatever you think of it. Steve is pretty angry and says, we did not vote for these judges. We didn't vote for the EU Commission. We did vote for democracy. Steve, we may be some way from getting it. What does Scott in Tower Hamlets make of the involvement of judges in all of this, Scott? Good evening.
Oh, Nigel, I think I probably speak for a lot of people, but despair is giving way to fury with this whole situation. What strikes me is that if Boris Johnson gave advice to the Queen, right, the conversation, and it would have been a verbal conversation, was between Boris Johnson and the Queen. So the only two people present or able to give evidence about what advice was actually given would be Boris Johnson or the Queen, and the Queen can't be called to court.
No.
So whether or not Boris
but Scott, now this is where this strange procedure kicks in, because what they're going to do from 11 o'clock tonight, and we're going to examine this in the last part of the show, what they're going to do is they're going to go through all the messages of government ministers and government advisors to see on what basis did they give that advice to the Queen.
But there seems to be, Nigel, the thing which is striking me is like, it's almost Orwellian. What they do is they kind of commandeer sort of terms. You know, they're calling people from political rights snowflakes now because they commandeered that term. Now they're doing it in advance. And so they were saying stop the coup because actually they are the coup.
I know.
And so now that we
I know.
It's crazy. And it's like a network of people, like this Jolly old Mormon, all these other people. It's like a network within the state that is actually manipulating this whole thing. It is rank treason, and it is an attack. They're attacking every institute of government now. They're mocking Parliament. They mocked Black Rod and the ushers.
The behaviour, Scott. The behaviour. It was like a bad student union the other night. It really was.
It was. Yes, it was. And they then say that to criticise the impartiality of the judges, as Tom Swarbrick was saying, is to attack the very foundations. Now, hang on a minute. The very foundations of our constitutional order are being attacked. The Queen is being attacked when they say that prorogation, which is her prerogative, was done unlawfully. The Parliament itself is under attack from the Speaker and from judges.
I know,
and
but this
democracy is under attack.
But this is
we've got to rise up and do something about it.
Well, some of us, Scott, are doing our best, but we will do so in
doing your best.
But we'll do so in a properly democratic way. And isn't it interesting, despite this massive row we're going through, that with some exceptions, but mercifully few, most of this so far, thank God, is happening peaceably.
No, it's starting to get tense. The atmosphere is starting to change, and it's really starting to turn. And I plead with you, the Conservatives are going to say we can't campaign on no deal, but a better deal, a proper deal, a deal that doesn't enslave this country, is a mechanism for getting the Tories and the Brexit Party to work together.
Scott, we'd all like a good deal. All right, we'd all like a good deal. Who wouldn't? Who listening right now, if I said to them, do you want a good deal? Everyone wants a good deal. Of course they do. But the trouble is that the deal, or should I call it more accurately, the new European treaty that Mrs May brought to the Commons and was rejected 3 times is a bad deal, Scott.
But it's designed to keep us in.
Scott, you haven't got to convince me of that. I agree with you. I'm going to love you and leave you. Adam is a barrister in Leeds and says the courts have got this absolutely right. It's time for the government to face up to the lies it told as to prorogation. To close one parliament and open another, there is no need for a 5-week period. All right, Adam. Number one, the High Court in London said they'd acted perfectly lawfully. So are you saying the High Court in London isn't doing its job? And this 5-week thing, it's utter nonsense. Parliament was closed for an extra 4 days because we always close every single year and have for decades for the party conference season. And if MPs wanted more time to debate Brexit, why did they spend an hour and a half saying what a wonderful bloke John Bercow was? Why didn't they come back from Tuscany a couple of weeks earlier in August? I just don't buy it. And to me, the idea that somehow it can be unlawful for a government to call a Queen's speech, which is what we expect them to do pretty much every year, I find it very, very difficult to get into my head. I really, really do. Betty is calling from South Shields in the North East and is a new caller. Good evening, Betty.
Hello there, Nigel. Yes, I do not agree with the courts getting involved. As Mr Bercow was biased, and all of his favours went to the Remainers. How do we know that the judges don't have their own personal biasness? I know they've got to hold the law, but they're only human beings as well. And who's to say that they won't go in their own favour as well? And as for the conference, well, if they wanted more time, why didn't they cancel the conferences?
Absolutely. Cancel the conference, come back from Tuscany early, or not spend hours talking about this.
Stop calling each other names, stop putting each other down, talk civil like grown-up human beings. Shouting across the room is no way to come to an agreement about anything when you're only slighting each other, and it's not on, it's not civil, and it's not respectful.
You sound sick to death of our politicians, Betty.
I'm fed up with it. I'm really upset. I did vote to leave, but I tell you what, Labour and South Shields will not get my vote.
Well, Betty, my sense of this is, whilst the Conservative Party is still bitterly split over this issue, I think the Labour Party have got some real issues. And in a minute, Betty, I'm going to play you a recording from Tom Watson today, and you can see that the Labour Party are becoming more fanatically Remain by the day. Betty, I thank you for your call. Lewis in Thornton Heath says, what are you worried about, Nigel? What's wrong with the decisions of British courts? Would you prefer a decision from the European Court of Justice? Well, it's a clever message, Lewis. It's a very, very clever message. I'm just asking a question. How can we trust the independence of our courts when there is no written constitution or any precedent to go on? I mean, I'm asking a question. That's all I'm doing. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. The time is now 6:15. Time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz.
MPs have staged demonstrations at Parliament demanding it be recalled after Scotland's highest civil court ruled the 5-week suspension of it is unlawful. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he doesn't accept or agree with his deputy's latest call for another referendum on Brexit.
She was absolutely livid with the Labour Party, and I'm guessing that Jeremy Corbyn's speech yesterday to the TUC, in which he said that if he wins the election, he'll hold a second referendum with Remain and a credible option for leave, meaning staying in the customs union. Well, Betty, if that upset you, hold on to your chair and have a listen to the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson, speaking today.
We should unambiguously and unequivocally back Remain. We should back Remain not for electoral or tactical reasons, but because it is the right thing to do for the country at this time of greatest crisis since the Second World War. I don't believe there is such a thing as a good Brexit deal, which is why I think we should advocate for Remain. It's what the overwhelming majority of Labour Party members, MPs and trade unionists believe too.
Well, there's Tom Watson. Remain, and he now wants to actually push for a referendum before the next general election. So he's directly contradicting Corbyn on many, many levels. But, you know, whether it's Tom Watson, whether it's Keir Starmer, whether it's Diane Abbott, you know, whether it's Emily Thornberry, whether it's Mr Benn, wherever you look, you know, the most senior figures in the Labour Party are now all out Remain. But what of the courts? What of their judgment today? Is it unnecessary political interference, or is it necessary given the mess that Parliament is in? Was it wrong of Boris to want a Queen's speech, something that in most years we would have thought utterly and entirely normal? Let's go to Ian in Stockport, another new caller. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
We're doing well. Every day produces new surprises, Ian, and I have to say, you know, when I heard the judgment last week from the High Court in London, I didn't react because I just thought, well, yeah, of course that makes sense. When I heard this, I mean, I'm literally astonished by what they're saying, Ian.
Well, to be honest, I thought it was a little bit naughty, to be honest, because I'm a local magistrate,
yes,
and I was following the case quite closely, and I thought, to be honest, today, right, okay, the judiciary's overstepped their mark slightly.
Well, I guess the ultimate test of this, Ian, is going to be the Supreme Court next Tuesday, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Do you have any thoughts on what they may say? Or will it depend? Will it depend?
What they're going to do is actually follow the course of what the law actually says, and they're probably going to kick the case out.
Well, maybe you're right, although all this evidence that's going to be gathered, you know, from the mobile phones of government advisors, etc., if they find individual messages suggesting that the main reason for calling a Queen's speech wasn't to put a new legislative agenda on the blocks, but actually to stop 4 days of debate in Parliament, it could go the other way, Ian, couldn't it?
It could do well. It could well indeed. All right, okay, but they should have been doing this. All right, okay, when John Major was in power. All right, okay, and looking at the phone records of what he had done.
Well, it's a long time ago, Ian. I have to say, John Major did do some very questionable things, including, of course, himself proroguing Parliament, something which he now vehemently criticises. You couldn't make it up. Ian, thank you. Jenny is a new caller from Colchester. Good evening, Jenny.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call.
Not a bit. So, are the judges overstepping the mark, or do we need them?
They're all overstepping the mark, to be honest, Nigel. I get so frustrated with this. We all voted. We all had our vote.
Yes.
We all know that we had the vote 3 years ago, so we don't need another one. We just need the first one to be implemented. What I can't understand is I just feel that we true Brexiteers just are sitting back letting this happen. I don't think people are shouting loud enough on the Brexiteer side. I don't say that we should be out there protesting that. I'm not, suggesting violence, but we should be out there with a few more banners and saying we voted for it, deal with it, get it done.
Well, Jenny, I think you'll get your chance to do that, all right? If we don't leave on the 31st of October, then I think many people in Parliament will be very, very surprised at the level of uproar from, shall we call it, Middle England?
I think, I agree with you. I think more and more people are getting really, really angry about this now.
Yeah, and it's not just angry about Brexit. It's angry about the behaviour of Parliament. I think,
absolutely.
That's what really gets
just
people
one
down.
big shambles.
It certainly is, Jenny. Thank you for your comment and your call. Now, Stephen in Hertfordshire says, Nigel, you should be ashamed of yourself. It's a very dangerous position for you to posit that the judiciary are politically motivated and enemies of the people. Stick to politics. Let judges do law. I didn't say judges were enemies of the people. I said the Daily Mail ran a front page headline saying they were enemies of the people, which shows the huge passions that get aroused. Stephen, I'm asking a question. Given that we don't have a written constitution, given that there is no precedent or case law in these particular cases, by what measure are the judges making these decisions? I don't know. I'm concerned. I don't think that's unreasonable. James is calling from Oxford. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, are the judges doing the right thing, James?
Well, what I would say is we have a unique monarchy in this country who has also a unique ability to reinvent herself and plug into the people and to the people's views quite uniquely.
Yep.
It seems on this occasion that she's not good enough to make the decision and she must be crazy and not able to make a decision. Or it's like the illusion was that she didn't understand what Boris was trying to achieve. Let's be honest.
Why?
Boris was playing a game. However, I fully back it, and a lot of people do. And I think she thinks the country has had enough. Let's get on with it. Whatever it is, let's get on with it. And probably no offence, but the normal, just Middle England, as you quite frankly referred to earlier, people will probably solve it in the end, whatever it is. But we can't stay in this forever, in this no man's land. It's just crazy.
No, James, it's a bad place. It is reducing our democracy to a laughing stock. Goodness knows how the rest of the world views it too. But I mean, all the Queen did was act on the advice she was given by her government. The government have a new legislative
she's
program.
Not stupid, and she's got some very well-paid special advisors that sit around her.
Yeah. Okay, so you think she was very conscious of what she was doing and the reasons why?
Of course she was, yeah.
Okay.
And I don't blame her.
No. It's a fair point, James, a very interesting point. Thank you. And we very rarely, actually, have conversations about what the Queen herself might think of things. And it's pure speculation because, of course, she's too good. She's too professional to ever let us know. And even if she does give people her opinions, they are absolutely sworn to keep those private. Something Nick Clegg forgot a few years ago, but hey. Let's go to Bishop Stortford and speak to Tim. Tim, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Good evening to you. Thank you for taking my call. I'm phoning up. It's been a bad day, hasn't it, all round, I think, for this country. Having listened to the Scottish Court announcement and judgment, let's be honest, it was a political statement. He effectively personally criticised the Prime Minister, effectively said he'd lied to the Queen.
Yep.
Now, I was brought up to believe that the courts were independent. I now no longer believe that. Honestly, I no longer believe it. I believe they're politically motivated. And the gentleman who phoned earlier who says he thinks the Supreme Court will back the government, you must be joking. We all know what's going to happen on Tuesday. They will back the Remain argument, and Parliament will be back, I suspect, by certainly the end of the week, passing all sorts of resolutions.
But hang on, Tim.
Brexit.
Hang on, Tim. They've got party conferences. I mean, are they going to cancel their party conferences?
Yeah, I mean, this is incredible. Your comments.
No, they're not, are they?
Yeah. I think they will be flitting backwards and forwards from wherever they are to London. They didn't cancel their holidays, I note, in order to get back. You couldn't make it up. But I would finally say that our unwritten constitution has worked for hundreds of years. I honestly believe now we've got a government when the opposition effectively have a majority of about 30 in Parliament. Yep. They can't force an election. It's something from a Monty Python sketch.
Well, yes, and they seem so pleased, Tim. They've stopped us leaving with a clean break on the 31st of October. They've stopped us having a general election. They look so smug and so pleased with themselves. And actually, the more I spend time out round the country, and I'm in Sedgefield tonight in the northeast of England, the more I spend time out round the country, the more and more detached our politicians look and feel to me. Tim, thank you for your very, very strong views. Now, Linda from Orpington says she can't believe the uproar over this judgment. Questioning the independence of the judiciary is a slippery slope. If Corbyn did something similar to force through policy without scrutiny, there would be an outcry. Linda, they've had 3.5 years to scrutinise Brexit. All that this did, because it was closing down for the party conferences, is to stop 10 to 15 hours of debate on Brexit. The idea that somehow they're shutting down Parliament for 3 weeks, it's an outrage. It just doesn't bear with reality. Honestly, it doesn't. And Paul says, Watson's speech today, that's Tom Watson, put 5 million Labour Leave voters in the bin. They turned their backs on the working classes in the north. And I'd love to hear or get some comments from Labour supporters who tell me how Tom Watson's speech today helps Labour in the north of England, because clearly it does not. It's now 6:30. It's time for the news with Lisa Aziz. Well, the quarter session in Edinburgh is suggesting that the government may well not have told the truth to the Queen when she decided to prorogue Parliament in advance of a Queen's speech. We're having a debate on that. A lot of you upset that the judiciary are involved, but if you think it's a great thing, if you think actually only the courts can solve this because Parliament can't, you call me 1034560600973. Now, last night we talked about President Trump's administration, and I said there'd been a period of relative calm. We'd not seen the big turnover of senior officers from Trump's team, but suddenly we have, because he demanded the resignation of the National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Does this put the administration into some sense of crisis, or is it the right thing for the president to have done? And joining me to talk about this is an old friend of the show, Phil Bryant, the governor of the state of Mississippi. Good evening, Phil.
Nigel, how are you?
We'll talk about Brexit in a moment, Phil. Yeah. We have a huge political crisis in this country, as I think you know. But I was making the point that actually the Trump administration had been relatively stable. Sacking John Bolton, I mean, he's a very, very well-known public figure in America. What do you think caused this?
He is, and a lot of conservatives particularly respected John. We saw him when he was a commentator on Fox News. We knew of his experience in prior administrations, but we understood that John was, if we want to say, a hawk in our terms in America. John was looking at how we might be able to handle some conflicts with a more aggressive attitude. Now, no one knows specifically. There's some talk, it may have been the Taliban visit to Camp David. I don't believe believe that to be true. I think John Bolton probably would have said that's not a good idea. But the president, as I saw earlier today, tweeted out that he respected John Bolton. He appreciated John Bolton's service to the nation. And so I think there was a disagreement. There had been some between the National Security Advisor and the president. And as we know about this president, there reaches a time to where he believes that the relationship between he and members of his administration may not be suitable for his purposes, and he makes a decision. And I think he did so in John Bolton.
I mean, we all know with John Bolton that he is traditionally very, very hawkish, very much part of the kind of neocon wing that we saw developing under the Bush presidency. Was it odd, really, that Trump ever appointed him to the role in the first place?
Well, I think the president tries to find people that he can trust. And one thing about John Bolton, I don't think you're going to get anything that is sugar-coated, anything that he doesn't truly believe in. He's going to tell you exactly what he believes for the best of the administration. I think he's ultimately loyal in that, but it does not mean that the president and the ambassador, who was former ambassador to the UN, could not have differences. And as the president said, he respected what he was doing. Perhaps it was a time in the president's administration when he was looking for a national security advisor, and John Bolton was recommended to him. I like John, but again, this is a president, Nigel, if you look with all the criticisms he's receiving from the left, is doing everything he can to stay out of a war, to get out of a war in the Middle East and Afghanistan. So he is going to follow his own path. Look, the president is his own best advisor, and he likes to take his advice above anyone else's.
Oh, I think he certainly does that. There's no question on that particular score. And Phil, of course, November 2020, it's just over a year away. I wonder, we keep seeing and hearing over here in the UK these endless debates that are going on within the Democrats as to who's going to be the runner. Is anybody sort of emerging as the favourite to take on Trump next year?
Well, I think we would love to have any of them. If you just look at the Democratic candidates now for the presidency, they are lurching so far to the left. It's all about socialism. Former Vice President Joe Biden seems confused. I'm not mad at the Vice President, but as you hear him talk, it is one mistake after the other. He's not sure what town he's in, so he seems to be leading. Elizabeth Warren, we would very much, as a Republican and as a Trump supporter, I would welcome Elizabeth Warren to be the Democratic nominee. There's going to be a healthy debate on that. Can you imagine seeing Donald J. Trump and Elizabeth Warren on the same debate stage, or Joe Biden with Donald J. Trump on the debate stage? I'm excited about it. I was excited, as you know, last election, but this one is going to be a little more enjoyable, I think, than perhaps even the last was.
Well, it's quite a strange concept for our listeners tonight, Phil Bryant, to think about politics and enjoyable, because we are going through this astonishing crisis in the country. Now the court in Scotland ruling against the government, Parliament, all sorts of shenanigans in Parliament. But really important this, because Jeremy Corbyn is putting at sort of the centre of his campaign for a second referendum and for us to stay part of a customs union, that somehow Brexit hands the country over to Trump. And we're beginning to see from Corbyn and the real left in this country a bit of anti-Americanism definitely creeping in. I saw the president about 7 weeks ago. It seemed to me that he was as pro-Brexit then as he'd ever been. How do you think the president views Boris Johnson's premiership?
Well, absolutely. I think he looks at Boris Johnson as a friend. I'm supportive of the Prime Minister. I think he's doing the right thing. I think he's taken great courage. He's in a tough spot. I mean, he's not had the cooperation of some of the members of his own party, of people you would think would align to him. As I see it as an outsider and as a board member of the World for Brexit, I can tell you not only the president, but we saw the vice president here just a few days ago supporting Prime Minister Johnson, talking about how we support Brexit, the World for Brexit. Brexit organization, as you know, chaired by Peggy Grande, President Reagan's last executive assistant. So this wonderful young lady that worked for President Reagan now is helping this World for Brexit movement. So we are hoping, we are hopeful that Brexit will be achieved, because this is a real threat to democracy around the world. As we see it, when a nation votes to say we want to leave, we made a decision, and we are telling our servants, the public servants that we elected, that this is the direction in which we want the country to go, and they ignore it. You could imagine that happening in Russia, perhaps in China, some countries, Iran, but in Great Britain, where the leadership of this nation says we're going to ignore the votes of the people who also elected us, and just simply not do their bidding, not do what the people of this democracy tell us to do. In America, we believe the people are the sovereigns and we are the servants. And so it is important to the world that Brexit is carried out in the manner in which we believe the majority of the people of Great Britain want.
Strong words there, Phil. And Phil, finally, and importantly, today is a very significant and very sad anniversary. And I, having spent 20 years working for American companies, I knew those Twin Towers myself pretty well. I knew a lot of people that died that day. And for anyone that's not been to the memorial there, it is very powerful and very moving. But I wonder, all these years on, how much is 9/11 still in American minds?
It's still very fresh. And as we look at the president trying to secure the border and build a wall, we understand part of it is to protect this nation. I was just looking at the BBC today about more immigrants trying to come here and crossing the channel. These are very dangerous times. 9/11 is fresh in the memories and in the hearts of all Americans, and we know this president is trying all that he can do to make sure that we avoid another terrorist attack on our own soil. It is a special day for all of those that we remember, the loved and the lost, 3,000 Americans that day. So we will go on and never forget.
Phil, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Well, that was Governor Phil Bryant, Governor of Mississippi, and very much, he's very much a Republican with his views. I'm sure that if we spoke to some leading Democrats, we might get a different view of the European Union and of Brexit. But that kind of is the divide across the West, isn't it? It's kind of those who believe the nation state is absolutely vital, and those who think, really, we should do things on a bigger level. Globalism versus nationalism, I guess, is how I would characterise that debate. In a moment, we're going to talk about the extraordinary story that government advisors, senior officials, have got by 11 o'clock tonight to hand in their mobile phones, give people their security codes, so that people can find out what advice was given by ministers ultimately to the Queen to support her decision in proroguing Parliament and allowing for a Queen's speech. We'll go into that in a moment, but for now, it's 7:15 and it's time for the news headlines with Lisa Aziz.
MPs have staged demonstrations at Parliament demanding it's recalled after Scotland's highest civil court ruled the 5-week suspension of it is unlawful. The Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says he doesn't accept or agree with his deputy's latest call for another referendum on Brexit before they're
hand over by 11 o'clock tonight their WhatsApp, Facebook and text messages, as well as personal emails, to try and find out what advice Boris Johnson effectively gave to the Queen. Helping me through this extraordinary story is LBC senior reporter Matthew Thompson. Matthew, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, literally, are people supposed to hand in their mobile phones? Who do they give them to? The headmaster? Robin, what happens here?
So this is all based on a very powerful but arcane bit of parliamentary procedure called the humble address, Nigel. You might recognise it from the times it's been used in this Brexit shenanigans back in December. Essentially, MPs asked the Queen to ask her ministers to do certain things. It was done for the legal advice, Geoffrey Cox's legal advice on the withdrawal agreement back in December. This one in particular is a double whammy. As you say, by 11 o'clock, MPs have voted to force the government to publish all the communications, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's post-it notes even, Nigel, from 9 key government advisors. That's Dominic Cummings, people like Lee Kane, the Director of Communications, and Nikki DaCosta, who's the Director of Legislative Affairs. And it's quite a narrow scope, so it's not all of their mobile phones. It's simply information or communications regarding the suspension of Parliament, the prorogation of Parliament.
Okay.
The reason that's important is that it might reveal the exact reasons that the decision to suspend Parliament was taken. Now, the government says it was normal procedure. It was to simply close the parliamentary session, introduce a new Queen's speech with a new legislative programme. But if it becomes clear that that wasn't the intention, or it wasn't the sole intention, that it was done, for example, for reasons related to Brexit, and therefore that the government has lied, and possibly lied to the Queen, well, then things could get pretty serious.
Wow. So that could influence the Supreme Court decision.
It might indeed, and there are those who say that it's important that the Supreme Court sees this kind of stuff before Thursday. Now, as to exactly how it's going to happen, there's actually a lot of, because these are such rare proceedings in terms of humble address, there's a lot of confusion in Westminster itself about how it's going to happen. I spoke to a couple of people who are signatories on the humble address list today. I think the most likely scenario is the government, all it has to do is lay the documents before the House. That's what's required in this humble address motion that was passed last week. So they could simply be put in the House of Commons library, for example. There are also those signatories who said to me today they were expecting that all of the signatories on the humble address might get documents in a PDF file or something like that to their emails, or they could just be published on the government website. Now, that's what happened in the case of December.
So if people comply with this, it's likely by the small hours of the morning we will know some of the things that have been said.
It's likely. However, you might remember, if I take you again back to November or December last year, the government refused to publish Geoffrey Cox's legal advice in full after a humble address, and it therefore became the first government in history to be held in contempt of Parliament by MPs. And then they had to publish, and what they did was they laid it before the House of Commons library and the Lords Library, and also published it on their website. So my understanding from speaking to those who are signatories on the humble address list itself is that they are expecting the government to comply. But
and who are those people, Matthew? Do we know? Are they household names?
So absolutely, it's people like Dominic Grieve. It's people like surprise, surprise. Well, he is the great legal mind, they say, the QC who's managed to force this out of the woodwork. It's people like Stephen Doughty, the Labour MP, and a whole list. There's a long list of MPs. You can see them on.
Are they all Remainers?
I would say I haven't got the full list in front of me, Nigel, but I would say it's a reasonable bet that yes, many of them would be leaning that way.
And Matthew, do you think Dominic Cummings is going to comply with this?
Well, look, it's difficult, isn't it? Because he, legally speaking, there is an obligation on him to do so now. But we have the history of the government very recently not complying directly with a humble address. So it's possible that they won't. They might find a way to legalize.
I tell you what, Matthew. We've just discovered tomorrow's row, haven't we?
It's very possible. All I can say is that those close to, for example, Dominic Grieve are saying to me today that they are still expecting to receive all of the documents at 11 p.m. We shall have to wait and see.
Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. What the judges involved? Are they doing a good job? Are they politically motivated? What's going on? Michael in Streatham is a new caller. Good evening, Michael.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Okay, so tell me, are you happy with what the court said today? Does it all make sense?
Yeah, it did make sense. I've been listening since the beginning of your show, Nigel, and I really just wanted to address the question that you asked right at the beginning about, should the courts be involved?
Yeah.
I mean, I think as a matter of course, it's a key principle of the judiciary that everyone should have access to the judiciary, and it's only really down to personal circumstances that some people can't access the judiciary, such as, simply not being able to afford to. But any question or any point that any individual wants to put to the courts, and I think in this case it was a group of individuals, has a right to do that and ask the court to determine it. So to address your point simply, yes, the courts should get involved because, it's a key aspect of our system. The courts should be asked questions and they should determine it. Whether or not you agree with the determination that a court reaches is an entirely separate matter altogether.
Of course. I mean, here's the funny thing, Michael, that when the High Court in London says that the government's acted perfectly lawfully, and the Court of Session in Edinburgh says they haven't, and it does leave us all scratching our heads a bit. And it makes me think, Michael, that in the absence of a written constitution, on the basis of what are they making these decisions?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of points I'd say on that. I mean, firstly, again, as a matter of course, different courts are going to disagree with one another, and in this case you've got even though it's a high level of the court in England, it's not the highest level, and then you've got a court in Scotland that disagrees. That's why the Supreme Court there is to sort of work this all out and come to an ultimate decision. But what I would say, just as a final point, is that I don't think it can be argued that the judiciary is acting on any sort of basis of bias. I've heard a couple of callers say that the decision is clearly biased. I mean, my point in respect of that, Nigel, is I think that, when a court makes a decision, if you are going to put forward the grounds that the court has been biased in its decision-making, I would say, OK, well, show me the evidence, show me the reports where the court has been biased in these sorts of instances on similar cases. And I might be more inclined to agree that the court has been biased. But I have one final point. The starting point, I think, shouldn't be that the court makes a decision based on bias. Surely the starting point is that the judiciary is independent. It doesn't make decisions based on bias. And if you are going to put forward the proposition that it has been biased, well, show me the evidence.
The trouble is, Michael, as you know, we're living in unprecedented times on both sides of this argument. But you made your arguments, you made them very clearly and extremely well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Cheers, Nigel.
I'm going to go just down the road to Consett in County Durham and speak to Sean. Sean, good evening.
How are you doing, mate? I think the Queen should be brought up for this, mate. Because I tell you what, she knows more. There's only two in that room. Mm-hmm. There's only two in the room, the Queen and him, right?
I think there might have been three privy councillors.
I think there's corruption, and your party's corruption as well.
Oh right. Thank you, Sean. Tell me how.
The whole thing stinks, Nigel.
Does it?
Honest to God, it stinks. And if she summons to court, she's got to go to court.
Oh, come on, for goodness sake, we can't summon the Queen.
I don't give a damn if she's the Queen Mother or anything. She should be summoned to court.
I think that's an appalling idea, Sean.
If she knows what's going on, she should be summoned to court.
So, Sean, you really would like to see the Queen summoned before court?
Yes, she's a human being.
All right,
Why should she be any different than anybody else?
Well, because she's non-political, Sean. Sean, I thank you for your point. It's not one I've ever heard before, but it was made with passion. You can't deny that. Hey, every day there's passion in this debate. We'll await tomorrow's sensations. I'll be back tomorrow at 6. At 10 tonight, it's Ian Payne. But up next, it's Ian Dale.
Nigel, thank you very